Good afternoon.
Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm Scott Bolohan, founder of the Twin Bill. First, I wanted to thank my brother Mark for the awesome theme music. He said he was inspired by Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, which we used to play together all the time on the Super Nintendo. Today, my guest is Joe Berton, who you probably know better as Sid Finch. It's now been 39 years since George Plimpton wrote The Curious Case of Sid Finch for Sports Illustrated, and it's left its mark on baseball history. It was a couple of years ago, I reached out to Joe asking for his blessing for naming our fiction prize, the Sid Finch Fiction Prize, and he has become a very good friend of the Lit Mag. He signs Mark Mosley's art that he created for the cover of that issue for all the winners of the Sid Finch Prize. It was a real joy to get to talk to Joe. I hope you enjoy, and happy April Fool's Day. We couldn't be more excited to have friend of the Twin Bill, Joe Berton, as our first guest on the podcast. Joe, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you, Scott. Great to join you today, and I guess to talk about Sid Finch.
Let's go back to 1985. You're an art teacher. You get a call from your friend Lane Stewart, who is photographer at Sports Illustrated, and apparently this was pretty normal. He would call you to join you on things, correct?
Yeah, Lane and I got to know each other pretty well through our hobby of painting and sculpting miniature soldiers. At that time, Lane was one of the few full-time staff photographers at the magazine, and his assignments were usually to cover people, not events. So, he wouldn't get things like the seventh game or that, but he might have the story about Pete Rose or about Larry Bird. So some of these stories I would help him on. At that time, the full-time photographers would have a choice of hiring their own assistants, basically the gophers that would help things load cameras or set up lights, haul things around. Lane then knew my interest in baseball, and usually he could finagle a spring training story as well. So we would do some of that. We shot a story with Calvin Griffith, who at that time owned the Minnesota Twins. We did something with Alan Trammell and Lou Whitaker with the Detroit Tigers. So he called up, again, leading into spring training, and said, well, I've got this story on the Mets coming up. And at that time, this is 1985, I'm a Cubs fan. So the Cubs had a great team in 84. And sadly, the whole San Diego mishap and such, but that's a whole other podcast. But and the Mets and the Cubs were in that same division. It wasn't as splintered geographically like it is now. And Lane called and said it's a story on the New York Mets. The Mets had just signed Gary Carter, so I thought that would be pretty interesting. He goes, yeah, it's about this pitching phenom. He's from Tibet. He's only got a food bowl and a rug, and he plays the French horn, and he's got an incredible fastball. What do you think? I said, well, it sounds good to me. I'll figure out the school situation. Count me in. Well, if you're good, get yourself a French horn and a food bowl and a Tibetan rug. Meet me in St. Petersburg. So that's how it all started.
Did you have any apprehension were you just along for the ride? What was your mindset at the time?
Well, I asked Lane about it, and he said Plimpton had done up essentially maybe a page on those old dot matrix computer printouts and kind of a general idea of the story and a background of the character I was going to play. And we thought it was just going to be maybe a column with a small picture down beneath it. And when we got down there, Nelson Doubleday was Plimpton's publisher. So I think that was the connection. That was the connection with the Mets. And Jay Horowitz, who was the PR man, he's still with the Mets now, Jay is. And Jay arranged it for us. So when we showed up, they issued me an official uniform. I think they were first going to give me number 45, and on the roster there was a number 45, and I always liked the number 21 and Roberto Clemente and such. I thought 21 would be a good number to have, and 21 was still available, but not on their little printed spring training rosters. So they issued me an official uniform, and probably within an hour, I'm dressed as a Met, walking around with the other Mets players with Davy Johnson and Bobby Valentine going from home plate to first base, and then they're going over with the players how to lead off. What are you looking for? I'm going, man, this is just like Pony League or something. How basic can you get? So I felt fine with that. I think if the players had any reaction, they probably thought I was just some kind of a friend of Nelson Doubleday's and just let him go with it. But we purposely stayed away from the big boys. So though Gary Carter was over there and Keith Hernandez and such, we left them alone, thinking if I hang out with the other rookies trying to make the team, we'll go pretty well unnoticed. And it was a different kind of spring training then, too. I mean, very few camera people were around. There weren't hordes of people around. It was a much more casual event. And that helped the situation, too. No one was uncovering what was going on. Now you'd have a hard time getting away with it, walking around with the real players. We got the grounds crew guy together, and they were doing up the tarp because Plimpton had said something about I was performing in secret, and the Mets were kind of keeping this all undercover. So they put up this huge tarp that I would go behind and supposedly pitch in secrecy. Ron Reynolds was the backup catcher, and he was fantastic with it. And Mel Stoudemire was a great help. Mel was just outstanding and fun to be with. I mean, the ideas were kind of absurd when you think about it, when you look at the photographs. I've got one bare foot, the other foot's got a big clunky work boot on it. And most of the time I've got my baseball cap on backwards, so there's a whole eccentricity about the character as well.
How many of them knew what was going on?
The young guys, Dykstra and Mitchell and such, even Darryl Strawberry, is this going to be in Sports Illustrated? Is this good? I said, I don't know. We're just taking a bunch of pictures. I couldn't make any promises. Lane couldn't make any promises. Lane was just shooting away, getting all kinds of different scenarios done. So we did 2.5 days with them and then disappeared. But during that time, all kinds of different scenarios, again, because Lane didn't know what they were going to use. I think with our charm and good intentions, we were able to talk ourselves into a lot of different situations. So he kept taking pictures. We had access to the locker rooms, and I was talking to Ed Lynch. Ed was a pitcher with the Mets at that time and then became Cubs GM. We were going over the fact how primitive the locker room situation was then. And Ed was telling me this is the original locker setups that go back to Babe Ruth days. So you have to imagine kind of a poor summer camp that you might go to, and wooden huts and just so bad. But when we got in there, we noticed it was just mat board and lettering with the names on there. So I had mentioned to Elaine, I think we can make signs like that. Let's just duplicate. We'll put a Finch sign up there. So we got mat board and rub-on letters and did the Finch sign right between that. And they ended up using that photo too. I thought that was pretty fun.
Oh man! And your locker is like between like Strawberry and someone else. Oh man,
George Foster, I think.
That's Foster. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's unbelievable. You're down there. You are taking these pictures. How much leeway do you have with these photos? Is it you and Lane just trying things out?
Lane would come up with ideas. I would come up with things. We'd finish the day and say, well, you're this guy. What would you do? I remembered growing up with BB guns and setting pop cans along a fence line and shooting them with BB guns. I said, we ought to do something like that on the beach. And so we thought that would make a great shot. We would just line up some Coke cans because they were nice and red and put them on the beach, and I'd step back 60 some feet and just like I was dinging them off. So we had to get up early in the morning to do that. But at that time, 7-Elevens were still only opening at 7 and closing at 11. We were going through garbage cans looking for Coke cans, and it's getting light out. The sun's coming up. Finally, we found 3 Coke cans and head off to the beach. And we did all kinds of different scenarios, both shoes on, one shoe off. It's interesting, the different shots we did use of that particular one. That's what they ended up using that as the opening spread for the article.
Do you have a favorite photo from the spread?
I love that one. We went down to the beach again, and had the French horn in my hand, and that's a great shot. And I'm playing the French horn, kind of meditating on the beach side.
Yeah,
And
with the sun is setting. That's
right.
that's my favorite. It's perfect. It's just
I
the
love that
perfect shot.
picture. I worked with the music teacher at my school about how to properly hold the French horn, and making sure I don't want that to be a giveaway. Let's do it the right way. So I knew how to hold it, and I was able to get notes out of it, but I don't play the instrument. But I was making noise with it, and out of sight of that shot, there's like birds start circling up here, some like a weird mating call name or something. All of a sudden, the birds were appearing as these odd tones were coming up my French horn.
That's just the best. You come back, you're teaching again, and then it's released out into the world. What happens to your life at that point?
Yeah, it was I think it was the 15th, 16th, 17th, something like that. We were down there, and I got back to school on that Monday, and nothing is happening except Lane. When I left to go home, Lane headed up to Harvard to take a shot. And so I had a brief interlude at Harvard. So he wanted to get a classroom shooting out to the Harvard Square there. And he was finishing up other shots. He was getting another toy soldier friend of ours, Philip Stearns, who he posed as the Buddhist monk expert. We thought Philip would be great for that, to fill that role. And so Lane was still having fun trying to fit in missing characters to add to it. Then Lane gets back and he shows the carousel of slides to Plimpton and Mark Mulvoy. Mark was the managing editor at SI at the time. And Plimpton is just going crazy with all the scenarios, the goods that Lane is presenting to him. And he said, I've got to go back. I've got to really expand this story and fit kind of what the photographs are showing too. So he went back to expand it. Lane then calls me up and says, this is going to be a much bigger deal than we thought. He's excited because we've got now it's the final 4 issues. So some people get confused, and even friends of mine, Joe, you were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. No, I was not. I was not on the cover. But on the opening spread, we've got 2 pages of my work foot and barefoot. And then he's describing this, and then you open it up, and then there's the beach scene with the Coke cans on it, and more and more. I think it was 16 pages. He said they decided to even knock out some advertisers to expand on it. His last words were, "This is going to be a really big deal." So I didn't realize that until then the magazine gets released, and things start happening. They do like preview issues for the Time Life magazine. So in that building, Life gets it, People magazine gets it, all the media in there get it on that Monday morning. And people start calling Sports Illustrated to get, what do you think? Of course, they didn't inform the secretary. I think they were even surprised by the reaction. So one of the secretaries told us that Senator Dan Moynihan had called and said, this is great. What do you think? Well, we stand by our story, Senator. So the official office word for about a day was, well, of course, we're going to stand with it. Then they tracked Plimpton down, and Plimpton, with a complete straight face, is saying, oh, yeah, I was in touch with Sid just a few days ago. And they tracked Mel Stoudemire down. They're sending reporters back to St. Petersburg. And Mel is playing it all with a straight face. Well, you guys, it's 10 in the morning. You guys should have been here at 5:30. Sid already worked out. He's gone. So the Mets camp was still in spring training that week. So they rolled with it for a few days. And then it caused a geographical reaction because the magazine seemed to hit the East Coast Monday, Tuesday. I always got the magazine on Thursday. So Wednesday, Thursday, it was like a Chicago reaction. By Thursday, it's on the West Coast as well. And now the country's going crazy about it. And that Sunday, was going to be April 1st. So then now the Mets are calling me up and they want Sid to come back down for Sid Finch Day. They're going to have a special day, and they're telling me they're printing up T-shirts, and George is going to write a statement for me to read. And would I come down? The Lane is calling up and saying, "Well, you're the story now. I'm going to St. Petersburg shooting Sid. I'm not shooting Joe. You're my assignment. I'm down there covering your press conference." So on that Sunday, then the Mets, "Are you in? Can we count you in?" I said, "On one condition. This time, I get to keep the uniform." "Oh, sure, Sid. Sure. Whatever you want, Sid." So we go down there, and they've got the band, and ABC News is there, and ESPN, and it's just crazy time. And then, of course, some of the reporters know by that time it's the story is the April Fool's joke, but we're playing it straight, and I'm walking out there barefoot and my walking stick and the uniform and hat on backwards, and I think I had a French horn with me. And the statement that Plimpton wrote up was I was going to step away from baseball because there was too much deception in it, and it didn't fit with my philosophy of honesty. And but I would take up the singular game of golf, and if the Mets needed me later in the season, I would be up for considering that idea, something like that. So, then everybody's standing up and having fun with it. And I'm walking off. Of course, now the Mets guys, they all know the story. So they're coming up and enjoying it and having fun. And as I'm walking off, Gary Carter's there, so I'm able to say hi to him. And people are handing me baseballs to sign. And this kid gets the ball back from Gary Carter and hands it to me, and "Sid, sign my ball." "I don't want to sign your ball. You've got Gary Carter's autograph on it." Carter turns around, "Sign the ball, Sid." So, there's a few interesting baseballs out there. So,
oh, that's great. Do you have a relationship with the Mets still? Do you ever hear from them at all?
Sometimes. I did a podcast with Jay and Ed Lynch. So that summer was fantastic because when the Mets would come to Chicago, I would let Jay know that I was still around in town, and he would leave tickets at the front office for Sid Finch. And that was fun because then I would go down early enough to see Mel and some of the other players I got to know. And, they'd come over and get the latest Sid updates. And Mel would always give baseballs to whatever friends I had with me at the time. But he was just fantastic through it all. Ron Darling was a great help that summer. I did a few minutes in the broadcast booth. The Cubs wanted me to come upstairs, and then the Mets team, they were laughing. "Sid, what are you doing here?" I said, I heard Sid was pitching today. That was Sid Fernandez, right? "No, not you, Sid."
I think that the photos really make the story. And I found out when I was looking into this, the photo that I always thought was photoshopped, you're on the camel. Yeah. And that's a real photo. I had no idea.
Yeah. I tell some of the younger people that this, back in 85, it pretty much was pre-Photoshop and pre-internet. So you could, if you saw, if you were standing with Muhammad Ali, you were standing with Muhammad Ali. It wouldn't just be cut and paste and doing that. Yeah, those shots, Lane and his wife and I, we were in Egypt just the winter before. So with the Sid and Tibet connection and all of that, and Lane shot those photographs too. I said, "Why don't you see if they want to use any of the Egyptian photographs we took?" And then there is that one on the camel. And then there's one where I'm with a family of Egyptians. And when I got done riding the camel, because with my sculpting, I do a lot of Middle Eastern things, and I wanted to get the camel's saddles right and the camel blankets. So we were finished with the camel ride by the pyramids. I asked the man, Sultan was his name, if he could take the bags off and I could see how the saddle works and everything is strapped on. And he did. And then in Arabic, he's asked my Egyptian friend. Then they both started laughing. What did he ask? He wants to know if you want to buy the camel saddle. Yeah, of course. And he goes, "Well, I've got this one, or I've got one back in the village." So we go back to his village, and it's a dirt floor, and it was just fantastic. And we're talking camel saddles through my Egyptian friend, and he's got a propane tank that he's heating up, and he's getting out some pita bread and gooey cheese, and this is so cool. So I bought that saddle and then took pictures of the family and such. Lane and I went back 2 years later, and this is pre-Sid. So Lane and I went to see Sultan, and we tracked him down, and I brought photos I had taken of his family. So we took more pictures of Sultan and had the day out with the camels. And that's Sultan's family and his camel that I'm on in there. Then my friends went back to Cairo and tracked Sultan down and gave him copies of the magazine. And of course, the whole idea of April Fools doesn't cut it. They know nothing about April Fools. So there's a little village in Egypt that thinks truly Sid is real because there's my friend in the magazine.
When you first come back, are the students excited? What is your life like? Yeah.
One of my students that first told me about the magazine, he said, are you still going to be our teacher? What are you talking about? Well, we got Sports Illustrated, and you're with the Mets now. What are you going to do? And I hadn't seen the story yet. So at the end of that day, I went to our local 7-Eleven and like the fourth one from the back, took it out. And then I knew things were going to be a bit different. But that summer of Sid, that summer was really great because then it became such a big deal for George as well. He was excited about it because it reached a new audience. I mean, he was always involved with his Paris Review literary magazine. He was so excited about the response it got. The magazine loved it. Mark Mulvoy loved it because at that time, it was over 2,000 letters to the editor they got. So I asked for copies of all this stuff. I was just kind of amazed by the whole story. So some of the letters there were a few in shock, but most were so favorable. And then others were adding their own interactions with Sid. Like, I met Sid in Egypt when he was down, on his way to Khartoum. Something they were adding their own little exaggerated chapters. Some of my college friends, I would play baseball, but truly the emphasis is on the word play, not very good at it. So my good friends knew the baseball stuff was made up, but I had what I thought were really pretty good friends I knew in school calling, Joe, when did you get so good playing the French horn? I can't believe you. Well, okay, you know the baseball stuff is made up, but you're going to believe the French horn stuff. So,
did you ever pitch as a kid?
Well, can't just pick up games, nothing in an organized way.
Yeah.
Where we grew up, we had a big field in the back that we would, as long as you had 3 or 4 kids on a side, then we'd play baseball. Right field was definitely an out. So
that the delivery is so distinctive. The leg kick, the lean. Where does that come from? I mean, I know that in the write-up he describes it as goofy like.
Goofy gone crazy, I think.
Goofy, yeah.
No, we were doing all kinds of exaggerated things, and then I didn't realize. I've got large feet naturally, but when I raised my foot up, I didn't realize that my toes would spread out. And one of the letters to the editor was actually, I think 2 of them were from foot doctors on how we could fix Sid's toes. No, they're just that way naturally. They're just large and they spread out when you lean back.
I think I read at some point that George Plimpton said something like he doesn't usually get to meet his character. What was your relationship like with George?
I think looking back at the story, that was probably one of the most rewarding experiences was getting to know him better. So I think it was maybe early summer of that year. They called me up and they wanted to do a roast Plimpton night at the Regis Hotel in New York, and would I be in? And they say, yeah, we're getting together a number of athletes that George has written about. So here was Jerry Cheevers, and George had done Open Net about playing hockey, and Nick Petrosani, who was with the Detroit Lions to relate to the Paper Lion, and Floyd Patterson, because Plimpton did a boxing book with Archie Moore. So I think, well, those are real athletes. But this was, again, the summer of Sid. So I was the hot name. So get yourself a tux and show up. And then that was really remarkable because they put me together with all of these guys. And Jerry Cheevers and his wife were talking about their daughters loving the whole Sid story. And Floyd Patterson had heard that I was a teacher. So he and his wife wanted my advice about their high school daughter dating. They lived near Annapolis. So she wanted to date a cadet. And what did I think about the age differences? And I'm thinking, man, this is so unusual. And I'm going back to teach tomorrow. So it was just, and then George was just so great that all of us were there, but particularly exciting because his latest creation was there as well. When Gloria and I would be in New York, one of Gloria's shows was opening at the Met, and George was excited about going with us. So Gloria and her people were busy, and George and I hung out and went to Gloria's exhibition on Impressionism and fashion. So I really enjoyed getting to know him, and he truly loved hearing the further adventures of Sid, and we did a couple of follow-up issues over the years as well that he would write things up, and we would do more photographs to go along with it.
This is one of those things that the internet would have ruined it, but I also feel like the internet now has given it almost like a perpetual life.
Of course, April 1st is always kind of crazy, but at school, I would get some of my students that would say, oh, my mom and dad, they said to ask you about your baseball thing. And then I'd get the magazines out and show them, and the kids all thought that was cool. And then once kind of like our magic machines became popular, people look it up immediately. That I think that's really helped keep the story alive. And the other thing is, since it's a April Fool's story, every April some reporter is doing an April Fool's story, and then Sid ranks right up there with Pasta on the Trees or something, or certainly the best sports April Fool's story. So,
well, I was going to say, you're kind of the Santa Claus of April Fool's Day. You really are this sort of iconic figure. What is a typical April Fool's Day like for you?
Usually I get several calls. There might be a radio show that wants an update. They want something about the background of the story. And I'm always a bit cautious on that day because people are always trying to fool me. And so I kind of lay back and set things up ahead of time.
So I'm actually fascinated. You have a couple almost sort of Finchian hobbies. You're the president of the Military Miniature Society of Illinois. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And you're also a Lawrence of Arabia scholar. You've released a book on him. Is that also correct?
I do a lot of research on Lawrence and World War I in that area, the Middle Eastern campaigns. So the miniature hobby and Sid Finch, of course, overlap through Lane, and then some of, like Philip, another miniature guy, being in the story. So those worlds overlap for a little bit. The Lawrence world, and of course, that's predominantly English, so they don't really have a big knowledge of baseball. So those two worlds don't intersect too often. But if someone over there is kind of Google searching my Lawrence research, then they find all these baseball pictures come up, and hey, Joe, what's with this other life you've got going? That it does lead to some interesting events.
I stayed at Jesus College in Oxford last year. So I have a master's degree from Oxford, and I actually played baseball there. So there is like actually baseball.
Well, when you walk into Jesus in the courtroom, you've got the chapel on the right. There's a bust of Lawrence there on the right, and in the far left corner, that's the stairway where Lawrence stayed as an undergrad.
Yeah.
That summer of '85, I went back there to do some Lawrence research, and Oxford, because that's where Lawrence grew up. There's a lot of archival work there. Plus, his childhood home is there, his school, like Jesus College. So I was doing work at the Ashmolean and finished up there, and I was meeting my brother at the Randolph Hotel, which you probably went to, right across the street from the Ashmolean. So I go up there, and to the bar, and maybe there's 6 or 8 people that's standing around, and waiting in line to get a beer. And I ask the guy in front of me orders a lager, and I said something like, "Oh, you don't like the warm beer either? I don't. I'm getting a lager too." He turns around, he goes, "Sid Finch, Sid Finch." Of course, this is Oxford. Sid Finch. Of course, he'd be here. Sid Finch. It turned out these were 2 crazy Mets fans that they couldn't believe I was there. Of course, then they wanted to buy me and get my brother a beer as well. We're getting beers there, and then finally, they're asking all kinds of stories about the Sid story, and then they leave. And my brother and I were just talking how, really, when it comes to media exposure, this is just such a tiny bit compared to guys like the '85 Bears. They get that all the time. But as we're finishing our beer, the 2 guys come in with their dates just to see if Sid is still there, because they're big Mets fans too.
I played on the team out there, the Oxford Kings, and I still go play with them every year in Turin, Italy. This is their 26th year now. They've been out there.
Now that's a jersey I would love to have.
You know what? I can make that happen for you. I can definitely make this happen for you.
Cool.
I can get you an Oxford Kings jersey. Yeah.
I've got an Oxford baseball cap, but I don't have.
Do you really? Yeah.
In one of the follow-ups, the English are so fun with this story, but when Lane called and then George Plimpton to do this rematch of a Sid story, I said, "George, can't you get me to Tibet or Nepal or something?" "Well, I'll get you to England." So Lane was now living in England, Rye, which is kind of south by the Channel, and between Plimpton and Lane, they came up with the idea of one of whatever happened to Sid, where he shows up at a cricket match and gets disqualified because he's bending his elbow and not throwing right. So Lane sets all this up with a cricket match between Winchelsea, which is near Rye, and Rye. So we go there, and the idea is to, during tea break, I would go out there and throw at real wickets and such. And they bring a model down from London that is my girlfriend. Lane gets me an official cricket sweater and all of that. And he's working with the umpire who's holding my one work boot because I'm going to pitch barefooted. And the real cricket guys are out there at the pitch and the wicket that I'm going to throw at. And I'm taking my glasses off. I'm okay. They thought I was real. I'm just bouncing the ball in, and after about like the 3rd pitch, the guys are looking at each other. I go, "You didn't tell them, like this is just all fake. We're having fun." And they're looking at each other, going like this. "What's with this These Americans don't know anything about the game." So we got some great photos, but there is no legend of Sid over in Rye. Believe me, they know he cannot play cricket.
I'm pretty sure I remember reading that you were not married at the time that this all came out. How did you explain to your to-be wife that you have this alter ego? How do you even approach that?
That was kind of interesting in its own right, because we met the winter of '85, so the story is already out. And then I think it was spring, and that the next year, opening day, she works at the Art Institute. We're walking down Michigan Avenue. The local news, TV reporters and all that made such a big deal of the Sid story. So with baseball happening, it's not unusual, particularly those first years out, that if I'm at a baseball game, people would recognize me. And so we're walking down Michigan Avenue, and there was a carload of Cub fans, and the windows rolled down, and that all of a sudden they're yelling, "Hey, Sid, Sid!" They're pointing at me, and Gloria goes, "What's that about?" Like, well, might as well start telling you. So it was.
That's amazing.
In baseball history, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's funny because since I've started doing the podcast, I've been interviewing all these authors, and almost every book, it seems like, has some sort of Sid Finch reference. It's become a part of the culture of baseball now.
It is funny how things overlap, and I think as a baseball fan myself, I've always loved baseball stories, baseball movies, the game of baseball. One of the books I loved was Ball 4. George had printed up some baseball cards, and I thought these are so cool. I've got to get more of these to give to kids at school. So there was a phone number on the back. I called that up, and I explained, I did this story with George Plimpton, and I'm Sid Finch in this story. And the guy just starts going crazy about it, asking me all kinds of questions. How'd you get involved? How'd you know Plimpton? What'd you think of the Mets? What was Mel like? All of this. And I'm answering the questions and place my order for the cards. And out of politeness, and what's your name? He goes, well, I'm Jim Bouton. I used to pitch for the Mets or the Yankees. I guess we got a couple of good right-handers talking to each other. And I knew he had done the big league chew and stuff. So he's answering the phone and the back of the cars. So I had just looked at that book maybe a month before. So it was all fresh in my mind. And I'm going, well, Jim, you asked me a bunch of questions. I'm going to play it back. So I was asking him about the Astros and all the Alou brothers, and there's some funny locker room stuff in that book. So that was another odd but just serendipity moment of paths coming together again, and briefly getting to know Jim. And we agreed to send each other signed baseball cards. So to actually play I guess even a Walter Mitty part in the game, that I find I'm grateful for how that has all happened, and that's led to an introduction to some real people that play the game. It's kind of easy to go within that group as well. Some of these players, particularly when there was so many of them were still playing actively after the story, if I saw them, it was fun to catch up with them briefly. Some of the Cub players I've gotten to know fairly well. Steve Trout, I'll do Cubs games with him. Steve will get invited to do the Legend Suite, where you've got the booth upstairs and you can invite friends. And if you sign up to a certain level, you get a former Cubs player that comes in. So when Steve does that, if I'm available, he'll call me up and I've got another Legend Suite. Do you want to be a part of it? So we'll give him a doubleheader day with Steve, the real 84 Cub and a fake 85 Met. So they enjoy that. I was at the Cubs Marlins playoff game, the Bartman game.
You're at the Bartman game? Oh my gosh.
That was, we were so close. I hate people use like a pronoun like we. The Cubs were so close, right? Oh man, walking back to the L from that game, it was just so sad. It just.
What were you doing for 16?
For 16, well, my kids then, though I'm a Cubs fan, when they were young, they played, Little League baseball on the White Sox team. So I just knew this was God's way of just, they're not going to be Cubs fans. They are big Sox fans. But for the 16 experience, I loved it. Kyle Hendricks, my son was at Dartmouth, so Hendricks went to Dartmouth. So we were follow one of the games out there, and we were out east to visit him. That was just such an exciting group. And then Steve Trout and I, we were doing the Cubs convention the next January. So the players and the special guests, they have a floor upstairs with food spread out. And if it's your signing, you can go up there and relax with your family until it's time to go. So Steve takes me up there, and in front are all, Rizzo and Bryant and Javi Baez. Do you want to hang out with these guys? And I'm going, man, these guys are the age of my kids. No, let's go back with your guys. So in back was Bobby Denier and Gary Matthews, Lee Smith, all the guys I enjoyed watching, and of course most of them had heard of Sid Finch, and Steve's introducing me to the guys. So that was my crowd back there with the guys from the 80s.
Do you have an idea now, after all these years, of what the appeal of the whole thing has been?
I think some of it is a real draw to the excitement of someone doing something beyond the normal. That pitching at 168 miles an hour. Imagine that. Even after we did the pictures, I told Lane, try to pitch the idea of 125 miles an hour. George, that's so crazy. Everything in this story is somewhat believable, but that is so absurdly above the 100-mile-an-hour fastball. If you can get it to 125, people would believe that. Most people had no trouble going along with 168.
Coming on to close it out, we have Michael Gaspeny reading his poem from our latest issue.
Hi, I'm Michael Gaspeny. I'm going to read my poem, A Debt to Big Clue, 1975. I felt guilty for miffing my wife so many nights by flying from our dinner table to the guys above first base at Greensboro Memorial Stadium, where we assessed prospects swinging for the fences and kept the beer man hopping. So one time I shelled out for box seats behind the plate and took Cheryl. The tanned man next to me shone in a white shirt with split sleeves. His bludgeoner's biceps jolted me. From baseball cards emblazoned on my brain, I recognized the muscles of Ted Kluszewski, Big Clue. Strength more mythic to old boys from the 50s like me than gold medal champions hoisting barbells on Wheaties boxes. Settling the flutter in my throat, I asked, "Aren't you Ted Kluszewski?" He smiled, nodded, said he was there to evaluate hitters for the Reds. I introduced him to Cheryl. Her eyes whisked Clue's wavy salt and pepper hair and Herculean arms, the gold pen and notebook open in his lap. In between jottings, he lamented the loss of the old stadiums, homes, not domes. As Cheryl and I left the park, her hips brushed mine.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the Lit Mag and the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Until next time.
We got the set in. Sunshine, fresh air. We got the team behind us. So let's play two.